to me, the thing I'm actually most interested in as like a scholar of this movie is the thing that I think kids are least interested in, the thing that like most people pay the least attention to, which is everything live action in this movie. I think is quite interesting
For
and
sure.
rich.
Yeah, I agree.
And I will say one big piece of that is Stokowski himself, because everything that people criticize this movie and Walt Disney for in doing in this movie, like the basically having his way with classical music, and for example, like the arrangement of Toccata and Fugue in D minor, an organ piece for orchestra, which is like kind of quite a big liberty to take with it's sort of a canonical piece of music, but that's Stokowski, and he used to do that all the time in his actual live performances. So also the thing of like lighting up certain sections of the orchestra, that was the thing he would do in his live music. And so really like Disney and Stokowski were kind of a pairing made in heaven, because they were both interested in bringing like highbrow content to the masses, and that's why this movie often gets criticized for being very middlebrow and sort of kitsch. But it was the cultural project that they both wanted to be doing in their own individual art, and so it was why they were great partners in this. And I find Stokowski really interesting as a conductor, and I don't know if you'll agree, Thomas, but to me I think he's more dancing than conducting, because he does not give a clear sense of a beat ever, and his like cutoffs and indications are sort of more about dramatizing what the music is saying, which is what dance is all about, than like leading the ensemble. So there's something interesting where like, rather than, I mean, at least to my eye, as like someone that has sung in choirs and stuff, to me it feels like there's an inversion going on there, where Stokowski is not the guy leading the orchestra. It's actually, there's an orchestra supporting this sort of flamboyant performer who's like kind of taking the credit for the whole thing, even though he's like not contributing in any meaningful way other than like to give the audience something to look at. And in my dissertation, I drew a comparison between the conductor and Disney himself, which I think is potentially interesting, because Disney didn't draw a picture like after like the 19 teens. He was at that point like at a managerial place, and basically the people he was hiring were better at it than he was, even though he started out physically animating things. But it didn't change the fact that these were always Walt Disney movies. And there's something interesting where you're going to the theater, you're watching this movie because you want to see animation. It's a Walt Disney movie, but he didn't animate a frame. He didn't draw a single picture. And in the same way, it's the conductor who gets the big applause, even though you're going to hear music and he's not making music himself. So there's this interesting thing that we do with like ensemble and leadership where like, where the leader takes the credit, even though he's not generating the material, and kind of it makes sense. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing, but it's kind of odd when you think about it.
There's kind of a potent like analogy going on there. Yeah, I mean, because the MC even at the beginning introduces the work as by Walt Disney and Associates. Animated by Walt Disney and his associates.
Yeah. Tim, as a jazz person, I've spent very little time in my life being conducted or watching conductors. So I'll defer to your characterization of his conducting style. But it also strikes me we could take this a step further and say that at least with a conductor such as that. At a classical concert, the conductor serves a role for the audience, the same role for the audience as the animation does in this film.
Right. Giving you something to look at while you listen.
Yeah, and it gives you something, and it perhaps translates things into emotional terms that may be, either accurate to the music or kind of laid on top of the music.
The jazz thing is interesting too, because then there is that moment in the intermission where the conductor is absent and the orchestra sort of like naturally starts playing jazz.
Of course, it's clearly written. It's clearly all written out because those guys can't improvise. But
the thing that's kind of like really striking if you take the movie as a whole is that this is a movie called Fantasia. So this is a fantasy, right? And it is a fantasy in that like it seems mainly interested in introducing you to different worlds. Like each vignette is, here's a new world. This is the world of science when they do evolution and dinosaurs, right? And Deems Taylor is very explicit about like, this is not conceived by the mind of any artist.
And that story, as you're going to see it, isn't the product of anybody's imagination. It's a coldly accurate reproduction of what science thinks went on during the first few billion years of this planet's existence. Science, not art, wrote the scenario of this picture.
And what's interesting to me is that, okay, that much I agree. That's like what I guess I would agree the word fantasy means. But then from there, there's no Frodo taking the ring to Mordor. None of these actually have a journey. So once we land in our new world, every single one of these things, with the exception of Dance of the Hours, which I think is kind of the anomaly in this movie, everything else is kind of interested in social organization. It's all about who's in charge, who else is below them, what is their relationship. You know, Chernabog, the demon, he's got his little figures that he can manipulate with like total impunity and complete authority. And then there's Bacchus, who's like, seems like kind of the rich drunk uncle who's like around, and he's like the authority figure, but he doesn't command anyone. But then there's Zeus, who whips everyone into order, and he scares them, but he's also kind of arbitrary because he's just doing it for fun, it seems like, when he throws his lightning bolts. And then you know, we have these kind of like ethnographic little vignettes with all the dancing vegetables, and then there's this you know, the thing with Mickey and the brooms, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Again, that's all about like the dangers of industrialization. That's one way to look at it. But it's like the difficulty of managing a team, and especially managing a team whose work has been automated, right? Yeah. And so these are the things that are really fascinating to me in the context of the movie's like historical context, because this movie came out I believe it was a year after the strike. In any case, it was being made during discussions of the strike and when the
strike at Walt Disney Picture Studios.
Yeah, so I should give context. Animation people know we just call it the strike because there was one moment in animation history when there was the famous Disney strike of 1940. And for the first time, animation artists unionized, and the Animation Guild that I'm a part of now was basically born on that strike. And it kind of broke Walt Disney's heart or something. It basically broke him, because from that point on, he's kind of stopped being so interested in the animation department and started getting more interested in the theme parks and stuff. And he was very vindictive to the people that had organized the workers, and you know, it was illegal for him to fire them, so he said, "Okay, you can come back to work, but this is your new office," and it was a closet, and I'm not going to give you any work. Just sit there all day. And so inevitably, some of these people left and went on to found, you know, UPA or join Warner Brothers or whatever. So you know, everyone went on to have a future life. But it's just fascinating that like this movie, which I think is like surprisingly obsessed with social organization, was made at a time when this was like the big question at the studio. Like, we've gotten too big to consider ourselves a family. That's another piece of what this movie is kind of interested in depicting. Lots of families. You know, there's the family of Pegasus, and in the context of a family, you can have the clumsy, dorky little brother or whatever, and it's fine because we're a family. Actually, that's kind of fun and funny. Same with the mushrooms, right? And so in the context of a family, there's like this sense of belonging, even with difference.
Yeah.
You know, like you can be the odd one out, but you're still part of the family. But then when it goes to like what I read as like very clear representations of automated industrial, like, you know, Henry Ford style manufacturing, which is what the Sorcerer's Apprentice is all about. That's about like industrialization gone crazy. There is no room for individuality. And so the movie is expressing some kind of like anxiety about industrializing. And I don't think it's too far to think that like this is probably on everyone's mind, because it was exactly what they were dealing with in their real
Right.
lives. You know, Walt had, whereas before we were all on one floor, Walt has now separated us. Ink and paint is over there, animation is over here, in-betweening is on a different floor. And even though animation and in-betweening are like totally inseparably intertwined, the in-betweeners are not allowed to come upstairs to talk to animators without talking to management first. And so we've all been like parceled out, and we're like acting like little robots. And so to me, Mickey is Walt, and the brooms are like the fears of what happens when you industrialize an animation studio. You know,
it's interesting because even in the Rite of Spring sequence, you can see sort of social organization, or the problem of social organization being presented in a very like sort of primitive way, where right away there's competition and violence. Things are eating each other, even on like the microbial level, and then like the T-Rex emerges as like the head honcho just by brute force alone, you know?